But let's talk about the rules of a live roleplay system. In this case, we're going to look at the rules of the Lorien Trust live-action role-playing system. Lorien Trust is the longest-running fest-sized live roleplay system in the UK. It's been running since the early 1990s, and I've been playing it on and off since the mid-90s. So I know the rules pretty well, and I've seen a lot of rule sets come and go. Firstly, we're going to talk about how to generate a character, and that's what this video is going to cover. If you were to go to the Lorien Trust website, you might find it a bit much, and there isn't a nice helpful button that says how to start. What you actually need to find is the publications page, and there you're going to find the Player's Handbook and Game Rules version 4.06. That is the current set of rules for the 2025 season, so we're all going to be operating under those rules this year. That is 117 pages of rules, so there's a lot to work with there. It's incredibly comprehensive. You're going to find an awful lot of information is being covered in that rulebook. It does have a lot of rules you probably won't need on your first time playing, and it's stored in one single massive PDF. It also has this problem. There is no index. There is no table of contents. There is this half-page useful guide to which page numbers certain key sections appear in, and some guidance about what falls into those sections, but no subsection page numbers. And if you look at, say, the building your character section, you'll see some things in there that don't necessarily make sense for, building your character. So it's a little bit higgledy-piggledy in there. So let's talk about how you'd create your character in the Lorien Trust live role-playing system for the first time. The first question you're going to get asked after what do you want to call your character is what race do you want to play from the playable race section. If we look at the table in the book, we'll see that some of these are in bold, and they're the ones you can normally play a character from without any special rules. What that means is you can start your character at any one of those, and you might later get the opportunity to turn the character into one of these other categories. However, it's also worth noting that the LT has helpfully divided those up into elder races and younger races. The elder races are things like dwarves, elves, fae and orlogs, and they've been in the game world for a very, very long time. The younger races, beastkin, drow, halflings and uruks, have been around for less time, although still beyond most of our history. It's also worth noting that humans aren't a younger race or an elder race, they're existential. They exist in the Lorien Trust world the same way cows and rocks do. Notably also there is Umbral. An Umbral stuck on there as an opportunity to play anything that isn't from the normal LT world that you want to be. Some form of voidkin or demon or half construct, all sorts of other things can be played as an Umbral. None of these races have any immediate in-game effect other than a few factors that there might be some weapons that particularly target particular races, but they don't provide any obvious benefit or power like they would in some tabletop games. You don't get extra strength for being a dwarf or extra intelligence for being an elf, mostly because you're running on your own personal intelligence, and putting some elfies on doesn't make you feel smarter. You should also note that many of these races have at least some attempts of racial trappings that you should attempt to affect, so people know you are that race. If you're playing an elf, a pair of elfies are easy to put on. If you're playing a dwarf, I recommend a beard. But it's also worth knowing that the LT is a pretty permissive system for this stuff. I'm 5'10" and I play a halfling, and no one's judging the fact that I claim that. I do have to tell people regularly I'm a halfling, but still, once people know that, they all roleplay around that fact. The only bit you really need to keep track of when you create your character is the elemental weakness section. Every species on a Drea on the game world of Lorien Trust has an elemental weakness. So no matter how hard you try and be resistant to things that are flavoured with your particular element will always hurt you. Speaking of the game world, here it is. The factions who make up the game are the next thing you have to pick from, and there are 10 of them. These are your nations or groups of nations that you belong to. In alphabetical order they are. The Bears, who come from Caledonia and Orkney, they are very much themed on the Scottish clans, expect a lot of tartan, a lot of kilts. The Dragons, coming from a fantasy version of Wales and Ireland, these are very Celtic, They've got a Neolithic style to a lot of their things, and they're very much invested in their faith in their deities. The Griffins come from fantasy France and Spain, very focused on chivalry, one for all for one, bit of Three Musketeers in there. The Hearts come from a fantasy England known as Albion, so expect feudal lords and peasants, knights, etc. The Jackals come from the Southlands. This is a fantasy version of Egypt and Moravia, though always being careful to ensure that we are culturally appropriate. The Lions come from the small set of islands in the bottom right known as Lantia. Once upon a time they occupied Albion, but in the mid-1990s, out of character, there was a civil war and the Lions were driven out of that land, and now they rule Lantia. Heavily into Arthurian vibes. The Tarantulas come from tunnels underneath all these lands known as the Underdark. Once upon a time they were almost entirely drow, however that's shifted and they've become more diverse as time has gone on, but they still tend to lean into the evil aspect of that character type. The Unicorns come from the other set of islands, this time in the bottom left known as Mauritania. Back in the day they were itinerant nomadic traders and didn't have a homeland, but now their big focus is all about freedom and liberating people from oppression. The Vipers come from a fantasy Germanic nation known as Teutonia. Expect a lot of barons sitting in towers, cackling and waiting for a lightning storm, lots of undead, orcs and goblins. And finally, the Wolves. The Wolves of Norska. Would you like to be a Viking? If you want to play a Viking, play a wolf and be a Viking. After you've decided your race and your faction, we get into the numbers here. All characters in the Lorien Trust Live Roleplay system have 16 character skill points to spend. Some of these skills have multiple levels you can take, but in most cases they're pretty straightforward, and you spend your 16 points collecting character skills. You have to spend all 16, but that's not hard because some of them cost 1 point. It is worth noting also that down the bottom there are 5 skills you get for free. I say for free because back in previous versions of rules we had to pay for some of these. So all characters in Lorien Trust games can count, they can read and write, they can read a basic map, which is handy, it means you don't have to just stare at a piece of paper and sound stupid, and then they can all use small weapons up to about 18 inches and melee weapons that are medium up to about 42 inches in their primary hand. I'll talk about that primary hand bit in just a second. So let's move on to weapon skills. Lorien Trust is a system where combat does occur quite often, and while it is possible to play a non-combat character, you will be unable really to avoid combat potentially finding you. So a lot of people who play with skills to help them use the LARP safe weaponry that they become equipped with. And the first of these is ambidexterity. This is one of the 2-point skills that are quite interchangeable. I remember I said about primary hands. So in this game your primary hand, usually the one you write with, is the one you can do most things with. You can hold weapons with it for free, you can cast spells with it, and your other hand is known as your offhand. Your offhand counts as your primary hand if you have ambidexterity. That means you can hold a weapon in both of them, and you can cast using your offhand. So if you are right-handed, and that's your primary hand, you can hold a sword in that hand and fight with it while casting spells with your left hand. Or hold a sword in your right hand and another one in your left hand. You still can't do 2 things that require hands and concentration. So if you were, say, sensing magic with one hand, I'll come on to that later, you couldn't then cast a spell with your left hand without breaking the first set of concentration. Large melee weapon use also costs 2 points, and that allows you to use, shockingly, large melee weapons. You can use weapons that go from 43 inches up to 72 inches in 2 hands. This covers greatswords, polearms, quarterstaffs, etc. It is important to note you must use 2 hands. You cannot hold a spear or a greatsword in one hand and fight with it. It's also worth noting that the Lorien Trust does not allow the use of stab-safe spears for stabbing. A stab-safe spear has been built with the last few inches of the spearhead made of low-density furniture foam. This makes it a lot safer, and in some systems you're actually allowed to fight with it in a stabbing motion. However, no weapons in the Lorien Trust system can be used to stab with, even if it's been made to do so. Shield use is the last of the 2 pointers. It allows you to use a shield in your offhand. unless of course you have ambidexterity, in which case you can use it in either hand. Shields are invulnerable to all damage that's dealt to them unless that damage comes attached with the crush or shatter effect. Crush and shatter, whether delivered by a weapon or by a spell, destroy the shield. The shield becomes useless, and it's expected you'll either put it down or drop it to your side and not use it to parry any more blows. But don't worry, anyone with shield use can spend 1 minute of roleplay to repair their shield. Usually we do this by standing off to the side and tapping our shield with our hand and try not to look stupid. Projectile weapons is a complicated one, so we'll spend a bit of time on this. Projectile weapons covers bows, crossbows or slings. Now, if you shoot an arrow from either a bow or a crossbow, it will gain the through damage effect, which is pretty cool. If you're shooting ammunition from a sling, that just strikes for normal damage. However, the important thing about this is to use any of these weapons, you need to have what's known as a bow competency. To do this, you'll have to go to the Rangers Guild during a Lorien Trust main event, and then they will tell you a time when you can go off to a small, safe, out-of-character location with some of them to test if you are safe to use projectile weapons. This will involve them going over the safe ways to use these, checking you understand the rules around them and when they can and can't be used, and also how to use the weaponry and the ammunition safely, including checking arrows and other things are still safe to use after they've been shot. Once you get that, you get a nice little card with your name on saying you are safe to use a bow. If, however, at some point you are found to not be using a bow safely, refs might take this off you. Finally, the greatest of all skills for 1 point, missile weapon use. Missile weapon use allows you to throw throwing weapons with your primary hand. Unless of course you have ambidexterity, in which case you can use your other hand as well. Missile weapons are made specifically with no central hard core, and there are very specific rules for making them so they don't hurt if they're thrown at people. If you're in fight, you might want to not fall over very quickly, so you'll need some armour skills. All characters in the Lorien Trust system have 1 hit point per location in their body. That's each leg, each arm, your torso and your head. If any of these fall to 0, that location stops working, and if your head or torso fall to 0, you fall unconscious. So it's probably a good idea to have more than 1 hit. How do you do that? Well, you're going to need some armour. Armour skills bring in armour value. We talked about hit points, we call those locational hit value. Armour value works the same. It gives you extra hits on each location, but this time made of armour. It takes 1 minute to repair 1 point of armour value on a location, and again we usually do this by standing off to one side and tapping that location awkwardly and hoping it looks cool and we don't look ridiculous. If you're out of combat for 10 minutes, your armour is actually considered to be repaired. Mostly it's the convenience thing, so fixing armour doesn't become all you're doing when you could be role-playing. Some people in heavy armour can have an awful lot of points of armour value, and they don't want to spend half an hour fixing it all between combats. We also get the Discern Armour state ability, which with concentration and proximity, your hand being within about a foot of the target, you can tell how many hit points of armour or armour value are left on a location and out of a total of how much. This is a skill basically no one knows exists and certainly almost nobody uses, but it's interesting to know it's there, and there are some situations where it could become really handy. The first of the armour skills we'll talk about is light armour use. This is very straightforward. It costs you 2 points, and every location covered by the armour needs to cover at least 50% of the location with the phys rep. Gives you 1 armour value. This is usually represented with either leather or cloth padded as a form of protection. Medium armour costs 3 points, and it gives you 2 armour value. There's a pattern here. This is usually represented by whatever you would wear as light armour, but with rigid supports covering at least 50% of its surface. That might be metal plates, metal strips, very large metal studs, or some other way of showing that this armour has been heavily reinforced. It's also worth noting that if you're wearing medium armour, you can't cast any ranged effect spells. The armour gets in the way. You can still cast what are known as mass or proximity spells. Heavy armour then costs 4 points, and it gives you 3 armour value. This is usually represented by either metal armour like chainmail or plate, or an appropriate impersonation of that like polyurethane plate armor, or some of the aluminium suits of chainmail. When you're wearing heavy armor, you can't cast mass or range spell effects, but you can still do proximity effects. Body development is slightly different. Body development directly gives you locational hit points, or locational hit value, LHV. These are those body hit points we talked about before. Body dev gives bonuses to base LHV. That word base is oddly significant. There are all sorts of spells and other effects that can increase your number of LHV, but they can never increase it beyond double your base LHV. So body development can be really handy. For each point of body development, each level of body development, you gain +1 base LHV. So 4 points gives you 1 extra, and 8 points gives you 2 extra. So let's talk about magical skills. This is a fantasy world, and magic is really central to it. The majority of the power skills, or magical skills, give you spell lists: healing, corruption, incantation, and spell casting. Also important to understand these is power. So all spells will cost some of your power. We tend to in character refer to these as thorms of power, as in thaumaturgical power. You'll gain power by buying spell lists, but you can also buy bonus base power. A level 1 spell costs 1 thorm of power, and a level 2 spell costs 2 thorms of power. There are some specializations you can take from within these spell lists, but you don't need to worry about those until you're in the field playing the game. Similarly, there are things known as summoning lists that add some spells to your spell list, but again, don't worry about those until you're in the field playing the game. Finally, we will talk about ritual magic, which is its own game entirely and is going to take a bit of time to explain. So, the first, simplest one, spellcasting, incantation, healing, or corruption, level 1. Each of these costs 4 points, and they give you access to the level 1 spells from that spell list. You also gain 4 base power. Each of these level 1 spells costs 1 power, so unless you buy anything else, you can cast 4 spells per day. The level 2 version costs 8 points. It gives you access to the level 1 and level 2 spell lists. So note, to get to level 2, you don't have to buy level 1 and level 2, it all comes included in those 8 points. It also gives you 12 base power, so it's a better budget version than buying 2 level 1s. However, you can't buy multiple level 2 spell kit lists, so you can't have level 2 healing and level 2 corruption. There's nothing stopping you having a level 2 and multiple level 1s, however, if you really want to. Base power gives you bonuses to that number of base power. It's very straightforward. For every 2 character skill points you spend, you get +4 base power. Weirdly, you can purchase this without having any sort of spell list. There are a few very niche situations that can emerge in the game through various items or other things that can happen which allow you to spend power without having a spell list. There's nothing to stop you buying this, but it is quite unusual. So let's talk about ritual magic. Ritual magic is one of the more unique parts of the game. In every main Lorien Trust event, there is a ritual circle outside of one, the Great Adrian Fair, and multiple transport circles, which you have even at the Great Adrian Fair. Ritual circles are magical points of power in the land, and if you have the skill Ritual Magic, you can do various effects in those ritual and transport circles. You must have a casting ability to have Ritual Magic: healing, corruption, incantation, or spell casting. It's also worth noting that everybody with Ritual Magic has the ability to contribute to a ritual. I'll tell you what that means when we get to that skill, but this is another way to do it. It's rolled into your Ritual Magic skill. If you have level 1 Ritual Magic, that costs 2 points, you can use transport circles. You can enter either one of the smaller transport circles or a large ritual circle that's not being used and spend 1 minute to do a transport rite. At the end of that minute, and spending 1 thorn power, you have to state where you want to transport off to. You then put your fingers in the air and find a referee to see what happened. Level 2 allows you to do transport rites, but also perform 1 ritual each weekend. So now we've reached the first ritual using the ritual circle. Rituals are a small play that lasts from hopefully between 10 to 15 minutes, and you attempt to create something out of them. You are dealing with very, very powerful magics, and this is usually where we create either magical items or special magical creatures. It's quite hard to get the opportunity to do these, as there's only so much time a ritual circle can be used each weekend, and it's carefully guarded and controlled by the factions and the guilds. However, if you have the opportunity to do it, and you have permission to do it, you can create some very powerful things, and it's a lot of fun. Level 3 has the ability to perform one ritual every day, as long as you have permission, and an extra bonus called Network Attunement. If you can go into either a transport or ritual circle, you can do a 1 minute rite, and at the end of it, as long as you have the level 2 casting ability, you are able to produce the armor spell from the level 3s of those spells, very powerful magic, from whatever list you have. This isn't particularly powerful, but it's a useful little reward for people who take that level 3 ritual magic. Now, it's quite hard for a ritualist to do an entertaining play on their own in a ritual circle for 10 to 15 minutes. So it's really important they have people who can contribute. These people also add extra power to allow them to get a bigger result out of the ritual. So for 1 point, anybody can have the ability to contribute to a ritual. They don't need any spellcasting ability, and they just need to be enthusiastic and able to follow the guide and instructions of the ritualist. Last but not least, we have Invocation. Invocation's a bit of a black sheep in this list because it doesn't give you any spellcasting or ritual magic ability. What it does is allow you to invoke stuff. Stuff like scrolls, some weapons, all sorts of other stuff. With 10 seconds of concentration and proximity, you can say you are invoking them. If they're things like scrolls or weapons that say on them what happens if they're invoked, you do the thing. If they're not, you ask a ref if anything happened after you invoked it, and sometimes you get some really weird results. Finally, we have the knowledge skills. So knowledge skills are a wide range of other things your character can know how to do, and you'll notice many of these are quite cheap in terms of character skill points. Most of them involve some sort of lore sheet. This is an A4 sheet of paper you get given at Games Control if you have this skill, and it's full of 3-letter codes. These 3-letter codes will help these 3-letter codes can be compared to various pieces of cardboard around the field attached to items, people and objects, and see if you gain any information if they match up to any of the codes on your lore sheet. So the first and simplest one of these to go through. So the most important one probably to go through are the 2 potion and poison laws, and we'll start with potion lore. Potion lore gives you a lore sheet, and this lore sheet specifically tells you about potions. With 3 seconds of proximity and concentration, you can compare a potion laminated piece of cardboard attached to a bottle to your lore sheet. If any of the letter codes match up, it might tell you if it's a potion, what it would do, what kind of potion it is, how it was made, and other useful information. It says 3 seconds, but it's likely going to take you longer to get your lore sheet out and contrast and compare it unless you've memorized some of the codes. It's also worth noting that people with potion lore, if they have any magical ability to purge poisons, can do a master purge, which will purge out certain specific potions from a person's body. You can also use vapor potions. These are potions that you set, and after about a minute, a vapor is released that fills the area, creating a mass effect. Poison lore is also 3 points, and wouldn't you know it, it gets you a lore sheet. It also means that for 3 seconds of proximity and concentration, you can try and find out if a bottle contains a poison, using a lore sheet the same way as potion lore. Probably the most exciting part of poison lore though, is it allows you to use venoms, vapours and weapon oils. These can range from using a vapour poison to fill an area with an effect, but most likely it's to apply an effect to a weapon which you will then strike with. If someone doesn't have poison lore and they attempt to do any of these things, they immediately poison themselves. Cartography allows the person to create maps and navigate using them. The navigate part is usually relevant if you're on some sort of mission and you can tell a referee you have cartography and might get a useful bit of information or effect out of it. You also get to collect a regional map at each event, showing the area the event's set in, and a magical astrolabic map at the gathering. People with cartography get quite excited at that bit. Sense magic is 1 point, and it gives you a lore sheet. With 10 seconds of proximity and concentration, you can tell if a thing is magical. You'll also probably get some idea of the type of magic in it. Evaluation is also 1 point, and it gets you a lore sheet. With concentration, it doesn't specify how long, but I guess how long it takes you to use the lore sheet, you can probably find out how much something's worth. Recognize forgery costs 1 point and also gets a lore sheet. Again, with concentration, you can find out if something is or is not a forgery. There are certain abilities inside the game that allow you to create forgeries of things, so this can be a very useful ability for 1 point. Triage is not going to give you a lore sheet. It is, however, going to allow you to remove mortal wounds on limbs. This is an ability to heal that does not require magic. Now, a mortal wound is when a limb has been reduced to -1 hit points. That's going to kill you if you don't deal with it soon enough, and Triage allows you to do that, but only on limbs. 1 minute of proximity and concentration, usually role-playing doing some form of medical skill, and you can take a location from -1 LHV to 0 LHV, as long as it's a limb. If you have Triage Advance for 2 points, you're much more useful, because you can remove mortal wounds on any location of the body, with that 1 minute of proximity and concentration to go from -1 LHV to 0 LHV. Triage Advance also has the ability, with 5 minutes of proximity and roleplay, to take someone from all their locations at 0 LHV to all their locations at 1 LHV, though they will still count as the effect debilitated for 10 minutes where they can't do any strenuous activity. So, that's all the character points, character skills you can buy. So, that's all the skills you can buy with your 16 character points. Your character is complete and you've got all your skills. But wait, what's this? This thing called occupational skills, which you'll find mentioned throughout the rulebook and people will talk about all the time. Now, the fact they're called skills could make this very confusing, but try and focus on that occupational skills section. Back in the day, these were a very rare thing, and mostly revolved around you having a job outside of the main events. These days, they've become a way of improving your character, like experience, but without giving you any actual additional character skills. You can never get additional character skills other than those 16 points, but you can get all sorts of extra little abilities and areas of improvement through these occupational skills. You buy them with occupational skill points, often known as OSPs, and this functions as a combination experience system and loyalty scheme, because you get them for attending events, but you don't have to spend them on that character. You can either spend them on your current character or save them to spend on a later character. However, at this point, you've got everything you need to know to create a character for the Lorien Trust live role-playing system, and you can worry about occupational skills when you get to the field.